Alrighty, my friends, we're going to go ahead and get this thing started. My name's Austin Robinson with Accounting 6650. Doing my first presentation. It's going to be on Case 25, Gateway Hospital. And what we're going to do is we're just going to do a brief introduction of the case, and then we're going to work through the case questions at the end. You know, as I was working through some of these chapters that we had to study, I tried to think up a funny joke or a pun about ethics, but I can't. Get it? Can't? Kantian ethics? Oh, this is a great joke. Just kidding. It was an awful joke, but I thought it was kind of funny. Anyway, let's go ahead and jump right into the introduction of this case. So the case starts with an employee named Kristen who goes on a business trip with another employee named Troy. Now, Troy decides to bring his whole family with because the trip coincides with spring break for his kids. At the end of the trip, Troy sees that the expenses that he's accrued over the trip with his family are more expensive than he had anticipated. When they get back, he decides to send in a faulty expense report asking for an extra night as well as extra meals to help cover some of those lost expenses that they had, or over expenses. So Kristen is at work, and Joyce, the head of the accounting department, comes and asks about the high costs on the expense report and whether or not he actually stayed the extra night and needed the extra meals. So that's kind of where it leaves this case, is with Kristen stuck in this position of covering for Troy, or letting things, kind of slide, or, letting the can of worms out and telling on Troy, essentially. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at some of these questions. So what are the main arguments you feel Troy will make, and reasons and rationalizations you will need to address? I think that Troy thinks he needs compensation. He's been away from his family a lot, traveling and doing work over the years, and he feels like he deserves this. So I think that's an argument he'll bring up. Materiality is also a thing. He's going to probably bring up and say, it's just a very small amount, couple extra $100 for me, out of $1 million or more dollars that this company makes every year. So what's the big deal? He also could just argue that it's standard practice. Everybody's doing it. Any employee who goes on a business trip takes extra money. And then he could also argue that it's an isolated incident. It's never going to happen again. It's just a one-time thing. There's no problem here. So those are things that she should be prepared for. Question 2, what is at stake for the key parties in the situation? Well, obviously the relationship between Troy and Kristen are something that should be, is something that should be considered for the good or the bad. She should absolutely consider what this is going to do to her friendship with Troy. Troy's reputation and Kristen's reputation with the company could also be at stake. They could be viewed as untrustworthy if this came out that she covered for him and he decided to fill out a fraudulent expense report. Their employment could be lost. I think that that's something that's very valid. Could absolutely happen. And then obviously another party that's at stake here is obviously the company. The company is being stolen from and wronged through this fraudulent activity. So that's something that should be considered as well. Question 3, what levers can you use to influence how Troy reacts to your position in this matter? Well, I think that Kristen could absolutely argue that her obligation is to the company and not to Troy. Overall, the company is paying Kristen to work there. Troy's just another employee. It's not like he's making many decisions for Kristen, so that should definitely be something that she should lever over Troy. Another thing would be that she wants to have her honest reputation, and explaining that to Troy may be, very valid, and he might understand where she's coming from. Last but not least, another point of leverage that she could absolutely use is just say to Troy, I'm going to whistleblow. I'm going to tell Joyce what you did, right? And it may get him to change what he's doing, or just own up to it himself. Okay. Question 4, what is your most powerful and persuasive response to the reasons and rationalizations you need to address? To whom should the argument be made, when, and in what context? So I'm actually going to answer this backwards. The argument should definitely be made to Troy first. I think that this should be handled in person between the two, and it's definitely something that I think that could be handled between the two of them, allowing Troy to be able to own up to his mistakes, and it'll make it so then Kristen doesn't have to necessarily get in the middle of it. Troy can just do the right thing from here on out and make things right. Then the next step, obviously, if Troy doesn't want to do that, it's just to go right to Joyce and whistleblow, right? I think that that's the right time and place and context after she's talked to Troy. If you're talking about powerful and persuasive responses, the consequences approach, walk through, not having any trust between, the company and themselves, no job, set up for more dishonesty. Those are all things that could be argued. She could argue a moral approach. It's just not the right thing to do for her to walk away from this and to let him, take a couple extra $100. So then she could also just explain that it just promotes a standard of, a lack of ethics, right? She could just argue that there's a lack of ethical standards overall by allowing this to happen. So I think that those are the correct answers. Benjamin Franklin said it best, that honesty is the best policy, and I truly believe that. I think that if Kristen takes that stance and is honest with Troy and then honest with Joyce, that she'll find the solution to her problem. Thank you so much.